You think you can just walk up these stairs like you own the place?" The voice screeched over the roar of the jet engines. "This is a $60 million machine, not a public bus for the help." That was the last thing Courtney said before her hand connected with Vivian's face. It was the kind of disrespect that ends careers. But Courtney didn't know that the woman she just assaulted in the pouring rain wasn't a trespasser. She didn't know that the help she was screaming at was actually the woman who signed her paychecks. 10 minutes from now, the power dynamic is going to flip so hard, it will leave the entire airport shaking. And trust me, you want to see what happens when the owner finally speaks up. The rain at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was relentless, a cold grey sheet that turned the tarmac into a slick mirror reflecting the navigation lights of the parked private jets. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of weather that made billionaires anxious and pilots grumpy. Vivian Banks pulled the hood of her oversized charcoal grey sweatshirt tighter around her face. At 42, Vivian was a ghost in the industry. To the public, she was a myth, the silent partner behind Ascendancy Tech, a logistics AI firm that had just been valued at $3 billion on the Nasdaq. To her friends, she was just Viv, the woman who still drove a 3-year-old Volvo and preferred sneakers to stilettos. She stepped out of the black Uber SUV, not a limousine, just a standard Suburban, and grabbed her duffel bag. It was old leather, battered and scratched, a relic from her college days when she couldn't afford a plane ticket home, let alone a private charter. "You good here, ma'am?" the driver asked, eyeing the security gate nervously. "This is the private terminal. Usually, folks get dropped right at the door." "I'm fine, Jerry. Thanks for the ride," Vivian said, her voice calm, possessing a smoky timbre that commanded attention in boardrooms, even if her current attire did not. She walked toward the FBO, fixed base operator, entrance of Signature Flight Support. She wasn't here for a meeting. She was here to inspect her latest acquisition. 3 days ago, Vivian had quietly purchased Sterling Aviation, a boutique charter company that catered to the ultra-elite. She hadn't bought it for the profits. She bought it because she was tired of the service she'd been receiving as a client. She wanted to see how the operation ran when the boss wasn't supposedly looking. She bypassed the main lobby, flashing a temporary security badge she'd had her assistant, Sarah, secure under a pseudonym. She walked out onto the ramp where the crown jewel of the fleet was parked, a Gulfstream G650ER. The tail number was N-VB. The VB stood for Vivian Banks, though the crew didn't know that yet. To them, it was just another lease. Standing at the bottom of the air stairs was a man in an impeccably tailored navy suit, checking a manifest on an iPad. This was Richard Sterling, the former owner's son, and the current director of in-flight services. He was a man who wore his arrogance like cologne, heavy and suffocating. Next to him stood Courtney Miller, the lead flight attendant. She was stunning in a conventional way, with blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and a uniform that was tailored to within an inch of its life. She was shivering slightly in the cold, looking miserable and angry. Vivian took a breath. She looked down at her sneakers, then up at the jet. This was it. The test. She walked toward the stairs. She wasn't expecting a red carpet, but she was expecting basic human decency. She was about to learn that money can buy jets, but it can't buy class. "Excuse me?" The voice was sharp, cutting through the sound of the rain. Courtney had spotted Vivian approaching. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw a black woman in a hoodie and wet sneakers carrying a beat-up bag. Vivian paused, wiping rain from her forehead. "Good evening. I'm here for the 8:00 p.m. departure to London." Richard didn't even look up from his iPad. "Deliveries go to the side gate, sweetheart. Catering van is already here. If you're the late linen service, you're docked pay." "I'm not linen, and I'm not catering," Vivian said, stepping closer. The wind whipped her hoodie back, revealing her natural hair, damp from the rain. "I'm the passenger." Richard finally looked up. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, his lip curling in a sneer of pure amusement. He nudged Courtney. "Did you hear that? She thinks she's the passenger." Courtney laughed, a harsh, tinny sound. "Look, lady, we don't have time for panhandlers or confused tourists. This is a secure area. How did you even get past the gate?" "I walked," Vivian said, her patience thinning. "My name is on the manifest, if you'd bother to look." "The manifest," Richard scoffed, tapping the screen of his iPad with aggressive force. "Let's see. We have a Mr. Archibald, a duke of somewhere irrelevant, and the owner, Ms. Banks." "Correct," Vivian said. "I am Miss Banks." Silence hung in the air for a second, heavier than the humidity. Then Richard burst out laughing. It wasn't a chuckle, it was a full-bodied guffaw. "You? You are Vivian Banks?" Richard shook his head, wiping a tear from his eye. "Look, I've met Vivian Banks's assistants. They dress better than you. Vivian Banks is a tech mogul. You look like you just got off a shift at a fast food joint and got lost on the way to the bus stop." "Appearances can be deceiving, Richard," Vivian said, her voice dropping an octave. She knew his name because she'd read his file. He had 3 HR complaints for harassment and discrimination in the last year alone, all swept under the rug by his father. "Now, I would like to board my aircraft and get out of this rain." She took a step toward the stairs. That was the mistake. Courtney moved with surprising speed, blocking the staircase with her body. She stood on the second step, looming over Vivian. "You are not setting one muddy sneaker on this beige carpet. Do you have any idea how much it costs to clean alpaca wool? More than you make in a year." "Move, Courtney," Vivian warned. She was done playing the undercover boss. She was cold, she was tired, and she wanted a glass of champagne. "Or what?" Courtney taunted, crossing her arms. "You'll call the police? Please do. I'd love to see them drag you off the tarmac. We are waiting for a VIP, a real VIP, and you are cluttering up the view." "I am the VIP," Vivian stated, reaching into her pocket to pull out her phone and show the digital confirmation. "She's reaching for something," Richard shouted, his voice suddenly panicked and theatrical. "Security protocol." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Vivian was moving slowly, but Richard wanted a show. He wanted to assert dominance. Vivian froze, her hand halfway to her pocket. "I am getting my phone, to show you the email." "Don't lie to me," Courtney shrieked. The stress of the delay, the bad weather, and her own inherent bias boiled over. She saw a threat where there was none. She saw someone she deemed lesser daring to challenge her authority on her jet. Vivian took one step forward, intending to bypass Courtney and speak directly to the pilot, Captain Harrison, who she could see moving in the cockpit window. "I said, stay back!" Courtney yelled. And then it happened. As Vivian tried to squeeze past the handrail, Courtney wound up and slapped her. Crack. It wasn't a movie slap. It was messy. Courtney's rings caught Vivian's cheekbone, scratching the skin. The force of the blow knocked Vivian off balance. Her wet sneaker slipped on the tarmac, and she fell hard onto the wet concrete, dropping her bag. The stinging sensation was immediate, hot and sharp against the cold rain. Vivian sat there on the ground for a second, stunned. She touched her face and pulled her hand away. There was a smear of blood. "Oh my God," Richard said. But he didn't sound horrified. He sounded vindicated. "She attacked you. I saw it. She rushed you." "She did!" Courtney gasped, clutching her own hand as if she were the victim. "She tried to push me down the stairs. I acted in self-defense." Vivian slowly pushed herself up. Her hip throbbed where she'd landed. Her cheek was burning. But the anger was gone. In its place was a cold, glacial resolve. This was no longer a test of service. This was a legal matter. This was war. She stood up, ignoring the rain soaking her jeans. She didn't scream. She didn't lunge back. She simply looked at Courtney. "You have made a grave mistake," Vivian said softly. "The only mistake was you showing up here," Richard spat. He grabbed his radio. "Security to stand 4. We have an intruder. Hostile. Assaulted a crew member. We need police. Now." Vivian reached into her pocket again, slowly this time. She pulled out her phone. It was dry. She unlocked it and dialed a number. "Who are you calling? Your bail bondsman?" Courtney sneered, though her voice wavered slightly. Vivian's calmness was unsettling. Normal people screamed when they got slapped. Normal people ran. Vivian stood there like a statue carved out of obsidian. "No," Vivian said into the phone, her eyes never leaving Courtney's face. "Get me the airport director of operations and get the Teterboro police chief. Yes, on my personal line. Tell them Vivian Banks is currently being assaulted by her own staff." Richard froze. He looked at the phone. He looked at Vivian. "Who are you talking to?" Richard demanded. "My assistant," Vivian said, lowering the phone. "She's also calling the heavy security team I have parked just outside the gate. The ones I told to wait because I wanted to see how you treated regular people." "You're bluffing," Courtney whispered, her face losing its color. "You're just a crazy lady." "Am I?" Vivian picked up her battered leather bag. She unzipped the side pocket and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound folder. She tossed it onto the wet stairs, right at Richard's feet. It landed with a heavy thud. "Open it!" Vivian commanded. Richard hesitated. His hands were shaking. He bent down and picked up the wet folder. He opened it. The first page was a bill of sale. Asset, Gulfstream G6R50ER, tail N650VB. Buyer, V. Banks Holdings. Transfer date, effective immediately. Richard's face went pale. He looked up, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. He looked at the document, then at the homeless woman, then back at the document. This is real, Vivian finished for him. Just then, the sound of sirens cut through the air. But they weren't just airport security golf carts. 2 black SUVs with flashing police lights tore onto the tarmac, followed by a sleek black sedan that Vivian recognized immediately. Her security detail had arrived, and they weren't happy. "You called the police," Vivian said, stepping closer to Richard, who looked like he was about to vomit. "Good. Because I'm going to need them to witness you getting fired." Courtney stared at the folder in Richard's hands. Richard, what is that?" Richard looked at Courtney, his eyes wide with terror. "It's the deed to the plane, Courtney. She owns it." Courtney's mouth fell open. She looked at Vivian, then at her own hand, the hand that had just slapped the face of a woman worth $3 billion. I thought," Courtney stammered. "You thought I was weak," Vivian said, stepping onto the first stair, forcing Courtney to back up. "You thought I was poor, and you thought you could get away with it." The black sedan screeched to a halt 10 feet away. 4 men in suits jumped out, umbrellas popping open, rushing toward Vivian. The lead agent, a massive man named Tobias, saw the blood on Vivian's cheek. Tobias didn't ask questions. He put a hand on his holstered weapon and pointed at Richard and Courtney. "Back away from Ms. Banks. Now, get on the ground." The drama was just beginning. The tarmac at Teterboro was no longer just a parking lot for private jets. It had become an active crime scene. The arrival of Vivian's security team led by the imposing figure of Tobias, changed the atmospheric pressure instantly. "Get on the ground, now! Hands where I can see them!" Tobias bellowed, his voice booming over the rain and the distant whine of auxiliary power units. Richard, who minutes ago had been the king of his tiny, carpeted kingdom, looked at the Sig Sauer pistol, pointed at his chest and crumpled. He dropped to his knees on the wet asphalt, the expensive alpaca wool of his suit soaking up the oily water instantly. Courtney didn't move. She couldn't. She was frozen in a state of catastrophic cognitive dissonance. Her brain could not reconcile the image of the woman in the hoodie with the reality of the armed security team protecting her. She stared at her hand, the one that had delivered the slap, trembling uncontrollably. "Ma'am, are you injured?" Tobias asked, stepping between Vivian and the flight crew, his back to the threats, his body a human shield. He saw the blood smear on her cheek, mixed with rain. His jaw tightened. "Protocol Alpha, we need a medic." "I'm fine, Tobias. No medics yet," Vivian said, her voice steely. "I want them to see the blood while we talk." 2 Teterboro Airport police cruisers skidded to a halt behind Tobias's SUVs. 2 officers, Officers Davies and Petrocelli, stepped out, hands on their holsters, assessing the chaotic scene. "Everybody calm down! Drop the weapons!" Officer Davies shouted, confused by the sight of private security, holding flight crew at gunpoint. "Identify yourselves," Officer Petrocelli added, shining his flashlight into Richard's terrified face. Richard saw the uniforms and scrambled, trying to stand up. "Officers, thank God! Help me! These maniacs are hijacking the plane! That woman, she's an intruder! She assaulted my flight attendant!" Tobias didn't lower his weapon. He simply reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a gold shield. Tobias Vance, head of executive protection for V Banks Holdings. These individuals are being detained for assault and battery on a protected principle. Officer Davies squinted at the badge, then looked past Tobias to the woman standing in the rain. He shone his flashlight on her face. He saw the hoodie, the wet jeans, and then he saw the eyes, and the blood. Davies lowered his flashlight slowly. His posture changed from aggression to immediate, respectful deference. "Ms. Banks?" Officer Davies said, his voice losing all its authoritative bluster. Vivian stepped out from behind Tobias. "Good evening, Officer Davies. I apologize for the disturbance on your tarmac tonight. It seems my employees were confused about who signs their paychecks." Richard's head snapped toward the officer. "You know her?" "She's nobody. She's a trespasser." Officer Davies looked down at Richard with profound disgust. "Shut your mouth. You are speaking about Miss Vivian Banks. She practically paid for the new security wing at the terminal last year. She doesn't trespass. She owns the ground you're kneeling on." The silence that fell over the group was absolute. The only sound was the relentless rain hitting the aluminum skin of the G650. Courtney finally made a sound, a small, strangled whimper. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The woman she had sneered at, belittled, blocked, and finally assaulted wasn't just a passenger. She was the boss of bosses. "But the manifest," Richard whispered, his world dissolving. "It said a duke, and the owner—" "The Duke is my poodle, Richard," Vivian said coldly. "He's flying commercial tomorrow in first class, because I didn't want him subjected to your incompetence. And I am the owner." She gestured to the soggy folder lying near Richard's knees. "Officer Petrocelli, if you would be so kind as to retrieve that document as evidence." The officer bagged the soggy bill of sale. "All right," Officer Davies said, taking charge. "Here's how this is going to work. Ms. Banks, do you wish to press charges?" Vivian touched her cheek again. The stinging had stopped, replaced by a dull throb. "Oh, absolutely. Assault. battery, false imprisonment for blocking my movement, and whatever else my lawyers can dream up by morning. Officer, this is insane, Richard pleaded, trying to stand again, but being pushed back down by Tobias's heavy hand. It was a misunderstanding. She provoked us. She looked like a homeless person. Vivian laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Let's be clear, Richard. You didn't stop me because I looked dangerous. You didn't stop me because I wasn't on the list. You stopped me because you looked at me and decided I didn't belong in your world. You decided I was beneath you. And Courtney there. She turned her gaze to the flight attendant, who was now openly weeping, mascara running down her face in black rivulets. Courtney decided that her uniform gave her the right to put her hands on me. She decided that my physical safety was less important than her beige carpet. Vivian turned to Tobias. Tobias, get them off the ground. Bring them onto the plane. Ma'am? Tobias questioned. The police can take them from here. No, Vivian said, walking toward the stairs, stepping right past Courtney without looking at her. The police can wait 5 minutes. I bought this company to fix its culture. The fixing starts now. Bring them inside. I want to fire them in air conditioning. The interior of the Gulfstream GE50ER was pristine. It smelled of new leather and expensive mahogany polish. The cabin lights were set to a soft, welcoming amber, a stark contrast to the miserable scene on the tarmac. Vivian walked straight to the mid-cabin club seating area. She bypassed the divan and sat in the forward-facing captain's chair, the seat of authority. She shed her soaking wet hoodie, tossing it onto the pristine white divan opposite her, a deliberate act of desecration. Underneath, she wore a simple black t-shirt, but even soaked in rain, sitting in that chair, she looked like royalty. Tobias marched Richard and Courtney up the stairs and into the cabin. They stood in the aisle, dripping water onto the carpet they had so desperately tried to protect. They looked like drowned rats, shivering uncontrollably from cold and terror. The two pilots, Captain Harrison and First Officer Lee, emerged from the cockpit, looking sleepy and confused. They had been preparing flight plans, oblivious to the war outside, or so they pretended. "What's going on back here?" Captain Harrison asked, adjusting his tie. He saw Richard and Courtney soaking wet, and then he saw Vivian in the main seat with blood on her cheek. "Ma'am, you can't be back here without flight crew escort. Who are you?" "Sit down, Captain," Vivian said, pointing to the seat across from her. "You too, First Officer." The command was so absolute that they both sat immediately without questioning her. Vivian looked at the four of them, her entire flight operations team. "My name is Vivian Banks. 3 days ago, I acquired Sterling Aviation in a hostile takeover. You all work for me." Captain Harrison paled. He exchanged a terrified look with his co-pilot. "Now," Vivian leaned back, crossing her arms. "Let's review the last 10 minutes. Richard." Richard jumped. "Yes, Miss Banks, look, I am so incredibly sorry. If I had known—" "Stop!" Vivian cut him off. "If you had known I was rich, you would have treated me with respect." "That's your defense? That you only treat human beings with dignity if you think they have money?" Richard opened his mouth, closed it, and stared at his shoes. "You are the director of in-flight services," Vivian continued, her voice monotone but lethal. "Your job is hospitality. Instead, you profiled me. You mocked me. You lied to police about me having a weapon, and you cheered when your subordinate physically assaulted me." She picked up a crystal glass from the table next to her, examining it. "You're fired, Richard. Obviously. But it's not just that." She set the glass down hard. "I'm dissolving your position. I'm auditing every expense report you've filed in the last 5 years. My legal team is currently looking into those 3 sexual harassment claims your father buried for you. By tomorrow morning, You won't just be unemployed. You will be unemployable in aviation. Get off my plane." Richard looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He didn't argue. He turned and stumbled down the aisle, past Tobias, and out into the rain to face the waiting police. Vivian turned her eyes to Courtney. Courtney was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. "Ms. Banks, please. I was scared. I thought, please, I need this job. My rent, my car." "You slapped me," Vivian said quietly. The cabin went deadly silent. "You were so offended by my presence, by the idea that someone who looked like me could be in your proximity without serving you, that you resorted to violence. You didn't just fail at your job, Courtney. You committed a crime. On camera." Vivian pointed to the small, unobtrusive dome on the ceiling near the entryway. "The cabin security system. It was recording the whole time. Cloud backup. My team already has the footage." Courtney whimpered, her knees buckling. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Tobias will escort you off the premises after the police take your statement. You will be blacklisted from every major carrier. You won't be serving peanuts in coach, let alone champagne in private jets. You are done in this industry." Courtney sobbed openly now, a raw, ugly sound. Tobias stepped forward, took her gently but firmly by the arm, and led her down the stairs. Vivian was left alone with the two pilots. "Well," Captain Harrison said, offering a weak, sycophantic smile. "I'm glad that's handled, Miss Banks. Terrible business. Richard and Courtney were always problems. Now, about our departure slot to London." "There is no departure slot, Captain," Vivian said, standing up. Harrison looked confused. "But the flight plan." "I saw you in the cockpit window," Vivian said, walking toward them. "You were looking right at us when I arrived at the stairs. The cockpit of a G650 has excellent peripheral visibility." I was focused on pre-flight checks," Harrison stammered. "Liar!" Vivian spat. "You saw everything. You saw your lead flight attendant blocking the stairs. You saw the argument. And I know you saw the slap, because the aircraft shook slightly from the commotion on the stairs." She leaned over the table, getting in their faces. "You are the captain. By maritime and aviation law, you are the ultimate authority on this vessel. You are responsible for the safety of everyone on board and everyone trying to board. And what did you do while your crew assaulted the aircraft owner? You hid. You closed the cockpit door and pretended it wasn't happening." She straightened up, looking at them with pure disdain. "Cowardice is worse than incompetence in a pilot. I can't trust you with my life at 40,000 feet if you can't handle a tarmac dispute at sea level. Ms. Banks, I have 20 years of experience," Harrison pleaded, "and tonight that experience amounted to nothing. You're both fired. Gross negligence. Pack your flight bags and get out. The police will want to talk to you as witnesses to the assault you did nothing to stop." Vivian turned her back on them. She heard them shuffling around, grabbing their gear, the murmur of stunned disbelief. She heard their heavy footsteps down the stairs. She was alone on her $60 million jet. It was quiet. She touched her cheek. It was still bleeding slightly. She walked into the lavatory, looked at herself in the brightly lit mirror. The wet hair, the tired eyes, the scratch on her face. She picked up a plush, monogrammed hand towel, one that Courtney would have burned rather than let her touch 20 minutes ago, and gently dabbed the blood away. She pulled out her phone and called her assistant. "Sarah, yes, it's done. The entire crew is gone. Yes, all of them. Cancel the London trip. I need a new flight crew down here by 8 a.m. tomorrow. And Sarah, find out who makes the best alpaca wool carpet cleaner in New Jersey. We're going to need it." The morning after the incident at Teterboro, the world didn't know what had happened yet. The tarmac had been scrubbed clean of blood, the police reports were filed under seal, and Richard Sterling was sitting in his father's attorney's office in Manhattan, desperately trying to spin a narrative that would save his life. Richard wasn't just scared, he was delusional. He was banking on the old world rules, the rules where a well-connected man in a suit is automatically believed over a black woman in a hoodie. He sat across from Marcus Thorne, a different lawyer, not the forbidden name, a fixer known for burying scandals for Wall Street's worst behaved. "We get ahead of this," Richard said, his hands shaking as he held a cup of lukewarm coffee. "We put out a statement. We say there was a security breach. We say she was aggressive. We say she threatened the crew. The police report is just, he said she said, until it goes to court." "And the slap?" Marcus asked, looking bored. "You said Courtney hit her." "Self-defense," Richard insisted, his eyes manic. "We frame it as a terrified flight attendant protecting the aircraft from a mentally unstable intruder. By the time the truth comes out, the news cycle will have moved on. Banks is a private person. She won't want a public fight. She'll settle." It was a gamble, a massive, arrogant gamble. And for about 6 hours it looked like it might work. Richard released a press statement at noon via Sterling Aviation's social media channels. It was titled, "Regarding the Security Incident at Teterboro Airport." It painted a harrowing picture of a deranged individual bypassing security and accosting flight staff, forcing them to take defensive measures. The statement was picked up by a few aviation blogs and a local New Jersey news station. Comments started trickling in, mostly supporting the crew, praising them for protecting the wealthy clientele's property. Richard sat in his apartment, refreshing Twitter, feeling a sick sense of victory. He thought he had won the narrative war. He forgot one thing. Vivian Banks didn't play by the old rules. She owned a tech company that specialized in AI and data logistics. She understood the flow of information better than Richard understood the flow of jet fuel. At 6 p.m., exactly as the evening news was starting, Vivian didn't issue a statement. She didn't call a press conference. She simply uploaded a file to a dummy YouTube account and tweeted the link from her verified, usually dormant, Twitter handle. The tweet read, "The truth doesn't need a press release, it just needs a camera." Teterboro, Sterling Aviation. The video was the raw, unedited footage from the Gulfstream's cabin entry camera and the external ramp security camera, which she had subpoenaed and acquired within hours, using her immense legal resources. The video started with Vivian walking up the stairs. It showed the rain. It showed her calm demeanor. The audio was crystal clear. "I'm not linen, and I'm not catering. I'm the passenger." The internet watched Richard sneer. They heard the fast food comment. They heard the alpaca wool comment. The audio was so crisp you could hear the disdain dripping from their voices. And then, the climax. The world watched Vivian reach for her phone, slowly, non-threateningly, and they watched Courtney, face twisted in hate, wind up and slap her. The slap cracked like a whip through millions of smartphone speakers around the world. The internet didn't just react, it detonated. Within 30 minutes, the video had 2 million views. By hour 2, it was trending #1 globally. The hashtag #Fire Sterling became as Arrest Sterling. Richard was sitting on his couch when his phone started buzzing. It wasn't a notification. It was a continuous, solid vibration of incoming death threats, reporter calls, and angry texts. Then, his father called. The real Mr. Sterling, the man who had built the company before selling it to Vivian. "You idiot!" His father's voice was a low growl. "You absolute moronic imbecile." "Dad, I can explain Explain! I just watched you mock a billionaire on CNN, Richard. Anderson Cooper is breaking down the footage right now. Do you know who Vivian Banks is? She sits on the board of 3 charities I donate to. She just pulled the contract for Ascendancy Tech's shipping fleet from my other logistics company. You didn't just lose your job, you just cost the family trust fund $40 million in contracts in the last hour. Don't speak. I'm cutting you off, Richard. The lawyers aren't coming. The bail money isn't coming. You wanted to be a big man on the tarmac? Go be a big man in Rikers. Do not call this number again. The line went dead. At the same time, across town, Courtney was hiding in her bathroom. She had deleted her Instagram, her Facebook, and her LinkedIn. But it was too late. The internet sleuths had found everything. Her high school yearbook photos, her address, her gym. She heard a pounding on her apartment door. She thought it was a delivery. She looked through the peephole and saw a sea of microphones and cameras. The paparazzi had arrived. But worse than the paparazzi was the email notification that popped up on her phone. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was from the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. Subject: Notice of Emergency Revocation of Certificate. Vivian hadn't just sued her. She had sent the footage to the FAA. Striking a passenger is a federal offense. Courtney's flight attendant certification was being stripped immediately pending investigation. She would never work on a plane again. Not even to hand out pretzels. The hard karma wasn't just happening. It was being televised. The fallout wasn't a rainstorm. It was a nuclear winter. In the world of the ultra-wealthy, reputation is currency, and Richard Sterling had just spent his last dime. For 3 months following the incident at Teterboro, the legal system and the court of public opinion worked in a synchronized, terrifying harmony to dismantle the lives of the 2 people who had stood on those airstairs. It began with the civil suits. Vivian Banks didn't just sue for the assault. She sued for defamation, emotional distress, and breach of contract regarding the service level agreement of the charter. Her legal team, a phalanx of sharks from the top firm in Manhattan, descended upon Richard with the force of a tidal wave. Richard sat in the small, cramped office of a court-appointed mediator. He had aged a decade in 90 days. The bespoke Navy suits were gone, sold to a consignment shop to pay for a retainer that ran out weeks ago. He was wearing a generic button-down shirt that was tight around the neck, sweating under the fluorescent lights. Across the table sat not Vivian, but Tobias Vance, her head of security and proxy. Vivian didn't attend these meetings. She had better things to do. "Mr. Sterling," Tobias said, his voice deep and vibrating with a quiet threat. He slid a piece of paper across the table. "This is the final offer from Ms. Banks regarding the civil litigation." Richard picked up the paper, his hands trembling. He read the numbers. His eyes widened. This is everything. This is my apartment, my liquid assets, the trust fund payout. "You defamed a billionaire CEO on a national scale," Tobias replied without sympathy. "You accused her of being a mentally unstable transient. You caused stock fluctuations in her parent company that required a $10 million PR correction. Frankly, Richard, you're getting off easy. We aren't taking your blood." "I can't sign this," Richard whispered. "I'll be destitute." "The alternative," Tobias said, leaning forward, "is that we proceed to trial. And when we play that video in front of a jury in New Jersey, a jury of regular, working-class people who take the bus you mocked, what do you think the damages will be? And remember, the district attorney is still holding the criminal assault charge in reserve. We recommend probation. But if you fight this, we push for jail." Richard signed. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. In that signature, he signed away the penthouse in Tribeca, the Porsche, the Hamptons rental, and his membership at the country club. But the social isolation was worse than the poverty. The phone stopped ringing. The friends who used to drink his champagne and laugh at his cruel jokes suddenly had full voicemails. He was radioactive. His father, the patriarch who had built the sterling name, had issued a public statement disowning Richard's actions to save the rest of the family business. Richard wasn't just broke, he was an exile in the city he used to think he owned. The descent of Courtney Miller. While Richard was losing his assets, Courtney Miller was losing her identity. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA investigation was swift and brutal. The video evidence was irrefutable. Striking a passenger is the cardinal sin of aviation. The revocation of her flight attendant certificate was immediate and permanent. She was placed on the national no-fly list, not just as crew, but as a passenger, pending a security review. Courtney sat in her studio apartment in Queens, surrounded by cardboard boxes. Her landlord had given her an eviction notice 3 days after the video went viral. He claimed it was for renovations, but she knew the truth. Neighbors had been leaving trash in front of her door. Someone had spray-painted Karen on her mailbox in red paint. She applied for jobs, hundreds of them. Receptionist, personal shopper, waitress. But in the digital age, your face is your resume. Every time she walked into an interview, she saw the moment of recognition in the hiring manager's eyes. Wait, aren't you the girl from the jet video? The interview would end immediately. We'll keep your resume on file, they would say, their voices cold. She was running out of money. She had sold her designer bags, her jewelry, even the uniform she had worn so proudly. She was down to eating instant noodles and dodging calls from collection agencies. The arrogance that had fueled her on the tarmac, the belief that she was better, cleaner, more deserving than the woman in the hoodie, had been stripped away, layer by painful layer, until only fear remained. The return to Teterboro. 3 months and 2 days after the slap, the rain had cleared. It was a crisp, bright spring morning at Teterboro Airport. The FBO looked different. The Sterling Aviation signage was gone, replaced by sleek, minimalist branding. V-Air, logistics and luxury. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom swept through the security gates. This time, the guards didn't ask for ID. They stood at attention and saluted. The car glided to a stop right next to the red carpet that had been rolled out toward the Gulfstream G650R. The door opened and Vivian Banks stepped out. She looked every inch the titan of industry she was. She wore a tailored white pantsuit that glowed in the morning sun, her hair styled in effortless, elegant waves. She held a Hermes Birkin bag, not because she needed the status, but because she liked the color. She took a deep breath of the jet fuel-scented air. It smelled like victory. Waiting for her at the base of the stairs was her new team. Captain James was a former Air Force pilot with 20 years of service and a jawline that could cut glass. Next to him was Eleanor, the new head of in-flight services. Eleanor was 55, a black woman with a warm smile and eyes that had seen everything. She had been working for a commercial airline for 30 years, stuck on the same regional routes, until Vivian's headhunters found her and offered her triple her salary to run V-Air's cabin operations. "Good morning, Ms. Banks," Captain James said, his voice booming with genuine respect. "Pre-flight checks are complete. We are fueled and ready for London. Flight time is 6 hours, 40 minutes. "Thank you, Captain," Vivian said, smiling. "And Elena, how is the cabin?" "Immaculate, Ms. Banks," Elena replied, "and I took the liberty of stocking that vintage ginger ale you mentioned you liked. We had it flown in from Atlanta." "That is why you're the best, Elena," Vivian said. But before she could board, a black sedan pulled up to the side gate, the delivery gate where Richard had once tried to banish her. Tobias stepped out of the Rolls-Royce and nodded to the security team. "Open the gate. Let him in." The sedan drove onto the tarmac and stopped 20 yards away. The door opened, and Richard Sterling stepped out. He looked small. The arrogance had been physically vacated from his body. He was wearing a cheap, off-the-rack suit that didn't fit his shoulders. He walked toward the plane, his shoes scuffing on the asphalt. He stopped at the velvet rope. He couldn't come any closer. This meeting wasn't accidental. It was the final stipulation of his settlement agreement. Vivian had agreed to drop the pursuit of maximum punitive damages in exchange for a personal, face-to-face apology at the scene of the crime. Vivian turned to face him. She stood on the bottom step of the air stairs, elevating her slightly. She looked down at him, not with anger, but with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a bug. "Ms. Banks?" Richard began, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. He held a piece of paper in his shaking hands, but he didn't read from it. He knew what he had to say. "I'm here to apologize," Richard said, staring at her white shoes. "For my conduct on November 14th, I judged you based on your appearance and my own prejudices. I treated you with disrespect, malice, and cruelty. I failed in my duty as a professional, and more importantly, I failed as a human being." The wind whipped across the tarmac, blowing Richard's thinning hair across his forehead. "I have lost my company," Richard continued, tears welling up in his eyes. "I have lost my reputation. I have lost my family's respect. I understand now that wealth is not a measure of worth. I am sorry, Ms. Banks, truly." Silence stretched out. The engines of the Gulf Stream hummed with a low, powerful whine, ready to unleash their power. Vivian walked down the single step until she was on the tarmac, eye level with him. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were piercing. "Do you know why I bought this airline, Richard?" she asked softly. Because you needed a jet?" Richard stammered. "No," Vivian said. "I have 3 jets. I bought this airline because I saw how you treated the catering driver 2 weeks before I showed up. I saw you berate a man making $15 an hour because the ice wasn't cubed to your liking. I knew then that your culture was rotten." Richard looked shocked at, You were watching before that night?" "I am always watching," Vivian said. "That night in the rain? That wasn't an accident. That was a final exam. And you failed." She stepped closer. "I accept your apology, Richard. Not for you, but for me. Because carrying anger is heavy, and I have a flight to catch. But I want you to remember this moment. Look at this plane. Look at my team. This is what excellence looks like. It is diverse, it is kind, and it is closed to you forever." She turned to Tobias. "He can leave now." Richard stood there, frozen. He wanted to say something else, to beg for a job, a reference, anything. But looking at Vivian's back as she ascended the stairs, he realized the distance between them wasn't just physical. It was existential. He turned and walked back to the cheap sedan, a broken man in a world that had moved on without him. The twist at 40,000 feet. The Gulf Stream roared down the runway, the G-force pushing Vivian gently back into the cream-colored leather of the captain's chair. As the plane banked sharply over the Hudson River, climbing through the clouds, the cabin became a sanctuary of silence and luxury. Elena appeared with a crystal glass of champagne. "For the road, Ma'am." "Thank you, Elena." Vivian took a sip, watching the Manhattan skyline shrink until it was just a glittering circuit board below. She pulled out her iPad. She had one final piece of business to conclude. Tobias was sitting in the jump seat near the galley, reviewing security logs. "Tobias!" Vivian called out. "Yes, Miss Banks." He unbuckled and walked over. "Did we receive the employment application report for the subsidiary?" "We did, ma'am." Tobias tapped his own tablet and forwarded a file to her screen. The janitorial contract for the Port Authority bus terminal in Newark. It's a grueling contract. Graveyard shift, minimum wage, heavy manual labor cleaning public restrooms. Vivian scrolled through the list of applicants. It was a list of people desperate for work, people the world often overlooked. And there, at the bottom, highlighted in yellow, was the name Courtney Miller. Vivian tapped on the file. Attached was a letter from Courtney's caseworker. It detailed her situation. Eviction imminent, blacklisted from all customer-facing roles, willing to take any labor available. Vivian stared at the photo ID attached to the application. It was Courtney, but without the heavy makeup, the perfectly coiffed hair, the sneer. She looked tired, broken. She applied for the night shift, Tobias noted, cleaning the bathrooms from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Vivian looked out the window. The sky was a brilliant, endless blue. She thought about the slap, the sting on her cheek, the feeling of being physically blocked from entering her own property because she looked like help. "She said I belonged on a bus," Vivian mused, her voice low. "She said the jet was not for public use." "Do you want me to reject the application?" Tobias asked. "We can flag her as a security risk." Vivian paused. "No." She looked up at Tobias with a small, enigmatic smile. "Hire her." Tobias raised an eyebrow. "You want to give her a job? After what she did?" "I believe in restorative justice, Tobias," Vivian said, setting a glass down. "Courtney cared very deeply about cleanliness. She was very concerned about dirt on the carpet. I think she has a unique skill set for scrubbing floors." "It's ironic," Tobias admitted. "It's poetic," Vivian corrected. "But Tobias? Make sure the uniform fits, and send her an employee handbook. Highlight the section on respect for all travelers. She's going to be cleaning up after the very people she mocked. Every single night she will see the tired mothers, the working men, the people riding the bus because they have no other choice. She will clean their mud. She will pick up their trash." Vivian picked up her iPad and signed the digital hiring authorization. "Let her learn that there is dignity in all labor," Vivian said. "And if she scrubs hard enough, maybe, just maybe in a few years, she'll wash away the hate in her heart. But until then, she has toilets to clean." "I'll send the offer letter immediately," Tobias said, suppressing a grin. "Oh, and Tobias?" "Mom, put a clause in her contract," Vivian said, turning her attention back to the clouds. "She is required to wear a name tag. I want everyone to know exactly who is serving them." "Understood." Tobias retreated to the galley. Vivian reclined her seat. She closed her eyes, listening to the soft hum of the engines. She wasn't angry anymore. The scales balanced. Richard was on the ground, learning humility through loss. Courtney was in the terminal, learning respect through labor. And Vivian was exactly where she belonged, ascending. She opened her eyes and looked at the flight tracker on the monitor. 45,000 feet. Speed, Mach 0.90. The turbulence was gone. The air was smooth. Vivian Banks smiled, picked up her champagne, and toasted the empty sky. "To clear skies," she whispered. She took a sip, and the jet chased the sun toward the horizon. And that is the story of how Vivian Banks turned a moment of disrespect into a movement of justice. It's a brutal reminder that you never know who you're talking to, and more importantly, that character is defined by how you treat people who can do nothing for you. Richard and Courtney learned the hard way. that when you try to fly above basic human decency, the crash landing is always painful. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a story about the arrogant getting exactly what they deserve. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Vivian was too harsh hiring Courtney as a janitor, or was it the perfect punishment? I'll see you in the next video.